What about trauma, the mother of all stressors? Now, I think most of us would readily acknowledge that we're going to see a lot more PTSD in the next 20 years than we have in the last 20. Now, just quickly, in DSM-4R, criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder would mean that during this traumatic event, you at some point thought you were going to die, or saw somebody else get killed or seriously injured. And then there's a whole cluster of symptoms that occur for 30 days or more, and these symptoms fall into 3 different clusters. The first one is re-experiencing. So, in a minority of the time are we looking at full-on flashbacks. Much more often they're just fragments of images. You know, what the hood ornament of the truck looked like before it T-boned my car. Nightmares, daydreams, and so forth. Second cluster is persistent avoidance. This includes behavioral avoidance. I'm not going back to that park where I got assaulted. I'm not going back to that intersection where I had that little accident. But it's also emotional avoidance or numbing, a blunting of affect. Unfortunately, the easiest and most common way to not feel what I'm feeling is through alcohol and drugs. I would say in 2012, if you're looking at a substance abuse problem and you aren't at least considering that there's been a traumatic event in that person's history, you probably need to get with the program. Hyperarousal is a third cluster. That includes a hyperstartle response because, let's say I was held at gunpoint and we're now months later at a birthday party, a balloon pops, we both hear it, but I'm really activated or shaken up by it. But probably the most important symptom of the entire diagnosis is hypervigilance. If these events, and they do, mainly happen through no fault of my own, what does that do but shatter my illusion of control? Sorry to be the bearer of bad news to you, but most of us walk around under the illusion of control. We think we're safer than we really are. Now, when that illusion of control is shattered, how do I regain some sense of control? Because feeling in control is pretty central to my existence. I'm going to go on alert. I'm going to scan the environment, making sure I never get caught off guard like that again. That's the only thing I can control, is not be surprised. Well, the more I look for something, the more likely I am to find it. And guess what? If I'm doing this, my sympathetic nervous system is like totally ramped up all the time. In fact, it's this one symptom that most predicts poor immune functioning of combat veterans. When they came back from Desert Storm, the National Center for PTSD, a coalition of VAs, showed that while everyone in the study had PTSD, they varied on the degree of hypervigilance. That actually predicted how poor immune functioning was. Now, evidence-based behavioral medicine, there are 2 clear standouts in terms of best practice for the treatment of PTSD. EMDR. Without a doubt now, finally it's taken Francine Shapiro 20 years to get people to really acknowledge this. Now, because you have guidelines and certification committees who have put their stamp on approval. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing, hands down, is best practice for the treatment of PTSD. I mean, quickly, if you're not in the field of mental health, just understand that the premise is that when we're traumatized, the memories of that event are kind of really consolidated in a very tight neural network. So if I have, I smell that smell again, or that unique sound will trigger and activate a very intense reaction. Through eye movement or other types of strategies, we kind of activate both right and left hemisphere of the brain while a person is recounting some of those details of that event, thereby diversifying the neural activation. And you still have the memories, you don't blot out the memories, but you diminish the activation and intense emotional reactivity that people experience. Emotional regulation and prolonged exposure. NFOA, this actually predates by several years, EMDR, but it's still effective. And the idea is teach people distress tolerance, emotional regulation skills, self-soothing skills, from dialectical behavioral approaches ACT, acceptance, commitment, mindfulness, other strategies. So I can actually kind of manage my feelings, and then prolonged exposure gradually, sometimes very gradually. Let me keep you thinking and talking about that event and imagery, and then ideally, maybe, if it's realistic, have you in vivo go back to that park, realizing that with prolonged exposure, gradually I can calm myself down, and there is no harm that then ensues. And Defoe's example, she gave at a conference last year. She said, you know, one patient she was treating had been assaulted by a tall, bald man. She was afraid of all tall, bald men. And through this experience, she was able to realize it's not all tall, bald men. It was other kind of circumstances of this event that worth me kind of attending to, but I don't need to overgeneralize it and be afraid in so many different contexts.